Three dinosaurs are running across the desert when they stumble upon a magic lamp. They rub it, and a genie appears. I have 3 wishes, so I'll give one to each of you, the genie announces. The first dinosaur thinks hard. All right, he says, I'll have a big, juicy piece of meat. Instantly, the biggest, juiciest piece of meat he'd ever seen appears in front of him. Not to be outdone, the second dinosaur thinks even harder. I know, I'll have a shower of meat. Immediately, huge pieces of meat rain down around him. The third dinosaur, certainly not to be outdone, thinks harder than the previous dinosaurs. I've got it, he cries. I want a meteor shower. Two rednecks, Dale and Billy Ray, were walking downtown window shopping, and suddenly they see a sign on a store which reads, Suits $10 each, shirts $2 each, trousers $3 each. Dale says to his buddy, Billy Ray, look over there. We could buy a whole gob of these, take 'em back to Arkansas, sell 'em, and make a fortune. Just let me do the talking, because if they hear your accent, they might think we're ignorant and not want to sell stuff to us. I'll talk in a slow Texas drawl so they don't think we is from Arkansas. They enter the store. Then, with his best fake Texas draw, Dale says, I'll take 50 of them suits at $10, 100 of them shirts at $2, and 50 pairs of them there trousers at $3. I'll back up my pickup, and the owner of the shop interrupts. You all are from Arkansas, ain't ya? Well, yeah, says the surprised Dale. How come y'all knowed that? The shop owner replies, because this is a dry cleaner's. A couple was going to get married, but unfortunately they had a car crash and died. Before the gates of St. Peter they stood, thinking maybe they could get married in heaven. So they ask St. Peter, and Peter says, well, it's quite rare, but let me see what I can do. So St. Peter goes into heaven. As the couple sits for a couple of months waiting for an answer, they begin doubting whether they should, considering the eternal aspects. Another month goes by, and finally St. Peter emerges from heaven, very bedraggled, and says, yes, you can get married. The couple says, but what if it doesn't work? Then can we get a divorce? St. Peter, red in the face and totally annoyed, slams his clipboard down and says, geez. The couple are shocked and scared, and they say, what's wrong? St. Peter says, listen, it took me 3 months to find a priest up here. Do you have any idea how long it'll take to find a lawyer? An Aussie and an Englishman walk into a bakery. The Aussie steals 3 pastries and slips them into his pocket. He turns to the Englishman and says, pretty slick, eh, bro? The owner didn't even see me. Unimpressed, the Englishman replies, typical dishonest Aussie. I'll show you the honest way and still get the same result. The Englishman calls out to the owner of the shop and says, sir, I want to show you a magic trick. Intrigued, the owner comes over. The Englishman asks him for a pastry, to which the owner gives him, and he eats it. He asks for another and eats that too. Then he asks for a third and eats that one as well. The owner says, come on, mate, where's the magic trick? The Englishman points to the Aussie and says, check his pockets. With the International Mathematics Conference in town, the bars around the convention center were going to be hopping. As was her custom, the evening manager was going from table to table to greet her guests. When she got to the first table, there were 8 mathematicians seated. Strange, she thought, since there were only 6 seats, but some of them were getting a bit frisky and were sitting on others' laps. When she got to the second table, there were 4 mathematicians seated. A bit more normal, she thought, probably continuing some debate from the afternoon session. When she got to the third table, there were 2 mathematicians seated. Ah, convention love, she sighed. When she got to the fourth table, there was just 1 mathematician seated. Well, some of these mathematicians are solitary types, she thought. When she got to the 5th table, she called the police. As I knelt down with a pair of size 4 shoes in front of this blonde in a short skirt, I couldn't resist a quick glance at her knickers. Hey, cheeky, she says as she gave a playful kick. I bet the only reason you work here is to look up girls' skirts, isn't it? That's an absolutely ridiculous accusation, madam, I said sternly. I don't even work here. A teacher asked little Johnny, what do you want to be when you grow up? Little Johnny says, I want to be a billionaire, go to the most expensive clubs, take the best bitch with me, give her a Ferrari worth over $1 million, an apartment in Hawaii, a mansion in Paris, a jet to travel through Europe, an infinite Visa card, and to make love to her 3 times a day. The teacher, shocked and not knowing what to do with the bad behavior of this child, decides to not give importance to what he said and then continues the lesson. And you, April? The teacher asked April. April says, I want to be Johnny's bitch. Back in the 50s, Bobby goes to pick up his date, Peggy Sue. Bobby's a pretty hip guy with his own car and a ducktail hairdo. When he arrives at the front door, Peggy Sue's father answers and invites him in. Peggy Sue's not ready yet, so why don't you have a seat, he says. That's cool, replies Bobby. Peggy Sue's father asks Bobby what they're planning to do. He replies politely that they'll probably just go to the mall and shop and go to a drive-in movie. Peggy Sue's father responds, why don't you kids go out and screw? I hear all the kids are doing it. Naturally, this comes to quite a surprise to Bobby, as he says, "What?" "Yeah," says Peggy Sue's father. "She loves to screw. She'll screw all night if we let her." Bobby's eyes light up and a smile breaks out from ear to ear. Needless to say, the evening's plans have just been completely altered. A few minutes later, Peggy Sue comes downstairs in her little skirt with her saddle shoes and announces she's ready to go. Almost breathless with anticipation, Bobby escorts his date to the front door while Peggy Sue's father calls out, "Have a good evening, kids," with a wink for Bobby. About 20 minutes later, a thoroughly disheveled Peggy Sue rushes back into the house, slams the door behind her, and screams at her father, "Damn it, Daddy, the twist. It's called the twist." A New York businessman named Eric is preparing for retirement. Tired of the hustle and bustle of Wall Street, he decided to shake things up a little and buy a ranch in rural Texas. He has everything moved down and put away before he arrives, and finally flies down when he hears everything's ready for him. Everything is so far away compared to the big city. A grocery store used to be just a few blocks, but now it's a half-hour drive into town. He can barely see his neighbor, which is a farmhouse a ways down the road. As he's settling in his first evening, an older Ford pickup rumbles into his driveway and parks. A large farmer gets out of the truck and introduces himself as Frank. "Well, howdy, neighbor. Saw all your stuff moved in here, and I thought I'd invite you to a party this Saturday at 6, a sort of welcome present," says Frank. Eric is delighted at the thought, thinking this must be that southern hospitality everyone talks about. "Well, I quite enjoy that. Count me in. Thank you for the invitation. I do want to warn you, though. I don't know what kind of parties you're used to, but down here we drink a lot." Having frequented the local bars with prospective clients, Eric replies, "That shouldn't be a problem. I'm no lightweight in the liquor department." Frank looks satisfied with the answer and heads towards his truck. As he opens the door, he looks back and says, "Another warning, we don't worry about neighbors and noise complaints here, so we get pretty loud when we party." Eric lived in a high-rise penthouse before, but there is nothing like the noise of a trading floor on Wall Street, so we should be fine. "I'm sure I'll be able to manage. Sounds good." Frank gets into his truck and starts it, but then he rolls down the window and shouts, "One last thing. Our parties get pretty wild with all the booze and music, and we end up having lots of sex. I hope that won't be a problem?" Eric grins. This is his type of party, but he only has suit jackets and button-up shirts. That's the polar opposite of Frank's plaid shirt and jeans. "Say, Frank, what should I wear then?" Frank blushes a little. "Aw, heck, I don't care. It'll just be the two of us." A Scottish farmer gets a knock on his door, and it's a man in his mid-30s who looks like he's been traveling for a while. The man asks if he could earn a meal and a place to stay for the night. "Do you have any skills?" the farmer asks. "Well, I do have a rare gift. I can communicate with animals." "Sure you can," the farmer says, "but I like your style. I'll put you to work." So the man does a few chores around the farm and earns his meal. At dinner, he says to the farmer, "I know you don't believe me, but I actually do communicate with animals, and I can prove it. While I spoke to the hens, they said you were there every morning before dawn to collect their eggs, and you've been doing so every day for years since your wife passed." The farmer says, "Wow, that's exactly right." The man continues, "I spoke to your cow, and she said you've been faithfully milking her every day before dawn, and you've been doing so every day since your wife passed." The farmer says, "I'm amazed. That's true." And the man says, "And I spoke to your sheep. That sheep is a liar." At the circus, a lion tamer strolls into the caged ring where there's one huge lion. The brave tamer says to the audience, "Watch this." Then he walks up to the lion, opens his mouth, and stuck his willy right in there. And then he slapped the lion on the head really hard and slowly removed his boy bits. Well, the audience was very impressed, much applause and shouts of delight. "Now then, if there's anyone out in the audience who thinks they can do that, I'll give them $500. Any takers?" Little old man stood up and said, "Well, yes, I'll give it a go." The audience went wild. "Okay," says the lion tamer, "come on into the cage with me. You're very brave to give it a go. Are you afraid?" And the little old man said, "No, not really, just as long as you don't slap me as hard as you slapped that lion." A child asks Santa Claus, "How do your reindeer get their names?" Santa replies, "Oh, I name them after memories, like Prancer frolicking through the snow." "What about Donner?" the child asked. A shadow settled across Santa's face. After a moment, he began. The year was 1847, and snowfall had trapped us in the Sierra Nevada.